Welcome, everyone, to the Security Weekly Virtual Hacker Summer Camp. I'm, of course, Paul Asadorian. My first interview in this series. I'm very excited, and I'm also very excited to welcome our guests for this segment, someone who hasn't been on the show in probably 15 years, Charl van der Walt. He's the Global Head of Security Research at Orange Cyber Defense. Charl, welcome.
Hey, Paul, thank you, and thanks for having us again.
Yes. Nice to have you and speak with you again. It's been a long time. Wicus Ross, he is a senior security researcher at Orange Cyber Defense, is also here with us. Wicus, welcome.
Welcome, Paul. Thank you very much.
Nice to have you both here for this segment. And just before we dig into the topic, we were just having this conversation prior to recording. So Orange Cyber Defense. Now, I thought you guys worked for SensePost. Can you just kind of set the stage for everyone with the organizational changes?
Sure. Let me do that quickly. So SensePost is a pen testing operation that was founded here in South Africa and then grew out into the UK. And about a year ago now, we were acquired by a crowd called Orange Cyber Defense, which is the cybersecurity division of Orange Mobile, which is effectively the French national mobile operator.
Fantastic.
And during that process, Wicus and I got transferred, I suppose, into a unit of Orange Cyber Defense called the Security Research Center, which focuses purely on cybersecurity research.
So you get to do cool research, both of you. And that's your job.
We get to do long, tedious research papers that have to get signed off by 400 people.
Gotcha.
but in there, there's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. And now one of those cool things is researching VPN technologies. So what, obviously with everyone working from home, that piqued your interest. But how did you get started on your kind of journey into researching VPN technologies?
Yeah. So I'll confess, the VPN research, I think, has become really topical and relevant now with COVID-19 and everyone working from home. But actually, our interest started long before that, basically because of two things that happened at more or less the same time. The one is that we helped to investigate an incident involving what looked to us like a Microsoft responder attack, where DNS hashes are being stolen by an outbound SMB connection. And the attack occurred on a machine that was running VPN software and therefore should have can just not been able. That outbound traffic shouldn't have been able and shouldn't have been possible. And we discovered that the attack occurred in just a very small window of time between when the machine joined a hotel Wi-Fi network and when the VPN was able to kick in. And so we became very interested in that very small window of time between joining a untrusted Wi-Fi network and the VPN kicking in to protect you. And then the second thing that happened was Wicus and I were both traveling a lot and became aware that when you're at a hotel or a coffee shop or an airport and you're dealing with a captive portal, then that Wi-Fi access point basically has the ability to hold you in that state between when you're connected to the LAN and when the VPN kicks in indefinitely. And so we became interested in studying that window basically and what it meant, and particularly the degree to which VPN software can protect you during that window, and I suppose the degree to which it should be expected to protect you during that window.
Because typically that initial connection is on an open Wi-Fi access point, correct? Or I guess not always.
Yeah, let Wicus speak to that.
Yeah, so in that initial state, especially when you're joining a captive portal, there's captive portals tend to be, also the free Wi-Fi tend to be an open Wi-Fi network. But in that time that you join between the VPN being able to kick in, you don't have internet access. So you're subjected to whatever that captive portal requires of you. And yes, in most cases, it's in the clear. There's no WPA or anything like that. But that's not specifically what we looked at per se, but we are interested in that state just before you're getting internet access and what you can do in that state.
And so from an attacker's point of view, would I attack the machine, get some running code on that machine, and then once it connects to VPN, execute the responder attack? Is that kind of the chain of events?
So I look in the research. What we do very deliberately is to focus on the protection offered by sort of enterprise commercial VPN software, and the place that we start from with the research is to kind of try and explore what it is that we expect from the VPN. And our argument is what we expect is what we term security equivalency, which basically means that a machine that's connected to a Wi-Fi access point and protected by a VPN should not face any threats different to a machine that's connected to the Wi-Fi network, to the LAN, to the corporate LAN. And in this research specifically, what we do is try and determine whether that's true or not. And we do that by identifying kind of 6 threat categories or 6 attacks that we think a machine connected to a public Wi-Fi might face, but shouldn't have to face if they were sitting on the VPN. And we then set out to test across 5 VPN products whether, in fact, the VPN does ensure that equivalency. So is it the same for a machine connected to the Wi-Fi network as it would be if the machine were connected to the LAN? Now, amongst those 6 tests, we include things like responder attacks. We include things like IPv6 bypass, which is the ability to interact with the host on its second stack. We have malicious JavaScript injection. We have simple things like sniffing, and even simple things like injecting phishing attacks into the captive portal, because the user has to interact with the captive portal basically before they can connect to the internet. But what we're really testing for this version of the research is whether the VPN provides that equivalency that we would expect.
Yeah, how are VPN clients handling that? Because if it doesn't have an internet access, it can't pin up a VPN yet until I've gone through this captive portal process, at which time that machine and the browser and network traffic are still vulnerable, correct?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Wicus handle that, but just to make a comment, you've put your finger on it exactly. We call it security purgatory. You know, it's this weird place.
Right.
But and captive portals illustrate it very nicely. But we kind of make the point in the paper that a captive portal is really just someone else's Wi-Fi access point, right? And the captive portal behavior is a feature of that access point. So yes, this research applies to captive portals, but it also applies to, say, home routers that have been compromised, where the attacker could make it behave like a captive portal, which is possibly the bigger, set of threats.
Right.
But Wicus, why don't you speak to how the VPNs handle that?
So the VPNs, all of the VPNs we tested had some form of controls to actually handle the scenario or be aware of it. But some of them required different types of setups, and they don't all speak to one type of standard or one type of ability. But in the default environment, you probably get split tunneling, or and some of them even have full tunneling out of the box as default. But typically, you would get a scenario that when the Windows, for example, machine probes for internet, it would determine that its probe is being messed with or interrupted or interacted with. And as soon as it detects that there's something in between what it's expecting, then it basically pops up the browser for you. And it's at that stage that some of these VPN controls that you have at your disposal can actually kick in and play a role in there. So it's pretty much about configuring features of these clients that actually can benefit or contribute to the state that you're in.
Yeah, that's interesting. The features are kind of fascinating to think about how VPN clients would help in this scenario, such as popping up a browser window, but doing that in a sandbox or something, like realizing that in that purgatory space, as you described, that it can be volatile and hostile, right? Because you haven't pinned up the VPN yet.
Yeah,
exactly.
So what we do in the research is we make the point that all of the VPN products, as the 5 products that we analyze, they all have some response to this threat in the form of features. And what we set out to do is test whether those features actually add any value. And being ahead of Blackout, I don't want to say too much about our findings, but in the end, what we do is we present this color chart where we have 96 different attacks that we launched against these 5 products, and we effectively color them in, as red or green, depending on whether the product mitigates that threat or doesn't. And there's a lot of red.
Is there one product that stands out, or is it pretty even, or you don't want to say before your talk? I totally get it.
I'm gonna test Wicus's media training. Wicus.
Well, yeah, okay. I think if you spend the time with the products, they all offer a good all-round support for certain states. Unfortunately, your guess is probably going to be good with which state it's going to offer the most protection, but they struggle in the captive portal state, being understandable, and some of them, even in one of our tests, you could spill over from one state to the other state. So I would say there are a couple of them that stand out, but it's once again, these things, testing in isolation under certain conditions, you can twist it to your will and your outcome. But we set up our tests to be reasonable and not to be totally over the moon. And we typically try to enable all the features we could up to a point where we could get the test to pass. I wouldn't say we were trying to be unreasonable in certain circumstances. It's just that when you go into a mode that you're trying to get the most protection in, how far must you go to get that protection? And some of it gets to the point where it could probably interfere or aggravate your end users,
right? Just
so that you can actually get to a point where it is maybe at an acceptable risk level for some people. And some people will probably have to say, well, we don't accept this invasiveness. We'll rather accept the residual risk because we think it's not that big deal.
Now, did the 5 vendors and producers of the VPN products, have they reviewed your results, and did you work directly with them and make recommendations?
Yeah, so we've been working closely with all 5 of the vendors, allowing them to review and comment on the configurations that we used. Feeding our results back to them, debating, some of the expectations with them in some cases. So that's been actually a really rewarding process for us, and I think we've got good relationships with them around it all. But I think, as you picked up on early, we divide the testing basically into 4 what we call scenarios. Where we differentiate between a default configuration of the product and a really kind of deliberately locked down configuration of the product on the one hand, and then we differentiate between the state where you don't have internet access on the one hand and a state where you do have internet access on the other hand. So it sort of gives us 4 scenarios to test in. And once the VPN is connected and you have these advanced features enabled, then you get subtle differences in performance between some of the vendors, and some of the vendors have potentially have issues that they need to deal with. But that seems to be a solved problem. Where I think the results are interesting, and we would really encourage people to attend our talk and visit our site, is in the state where the VPN can't connect to the internet, because there's a lot more to be said in that state, and I think there's a lot to be considered for the vendors and for us as users.
That's great that we can hope that they will improve based on your research to kind of plug. So there's less red in the grid is really the goal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Although, I had an interesting conversation with someone the other day who asked me, whose problem is this to fix? And clearly, we're in discussion with the vendors, and we think the vendors are well-meaning, and they're going to do what they can to address the problem. But an element of this research that I found really interesting is kind of the underlying dynamic. because it occurs to me that what's really happening is that we are offsetting the cost. As businesses, we're offsetting the cost of connectivity to our users. So we're saying, look, if you're abroad, you need to find a hotel, you need to find a coffee shop, you need to get online somehow, and it's effectively your problem to solve. And similarly, when you're working from home, use your home Wi-Fi and your home ADSL or fiber or whatever to connect, and it's your problem to solve. And that's fundamentally, that's the thing that puts these machines and these VPN products in this untenable position, right, where you're trying to create a safe tunnel over an environment that somebody else controls. And so the VPN products have responded by putting in all these features. And you as a user then have to respond by making sure you understand these features and apply them and make more trade-offs between usability and security. And probably you're going to end up having to layer more technology to kind of fill the gaps where perhaps the VPN can't do everything. And so we're assuming a huge amount of like security cost, basically, to counter the quote unquote savings from the connectivity costs. So I don't think it's just the vendor's problem. I think there's a kind of a discussion to be had about that fundamental paradigm and whether it really makes sense for businesses to expect their users to, pay for their own internet and accept the behavior that ultimately incentivizes.
Yeah, it's an interesting responsibility model. Now that you say that and I think about it is, some of it's on the user, some of it's on the machine and the VPN configuration and software on there. Some of it's on the network and which networks you allow your users to connect to. I know there's a few security companies, for example, right? They come here to the studio or see them in a conference and they're like, we're not allowed to use Wi-Fi when we're traveling. Like the company gives us 4G, basically USB modems, right? And they're just limiting the attack surface because whose responsibility is it to secure that Wi-Fi, right? Is it the hotel? Is it the coffee shop? And where does it all kind of fall, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the whole work from home, trend now has really kind of brought that to light. Yeah. Because, what our research shows is that home router really plays a significant role. It's not just repurposing the home router to, into a botnet or something. It has significant implications for the security of your internal network. Yep. And but you don't have any control over it,
Yeah, and also, the putting it on the user to segment their internal network, right? Whereas we've talked on previous segments where IoT devices especially rely on one big flat open network in the home, right? Yeah. They're using multicast and broadcast to basically be able to operate, right? And once you start breaking that, I can tell you myself and other hosts on the show that have done network engineering and security engineering for 20 years are like, wait, this is not an easy problem to solve. And now we got to put this on the user who's, doesn't have 20 years of networking experience.
It's not going to happen.
Fair. Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Agreed. Where can people find the research?
So we have a short link to a web page that we created for this purpose. It's bit.ly, and then the sub URL is Orange VPN. So orange like the color, and then VPN.
Got it. And we'll get that added to our show notes as well. Well, fantastic. Charl and Wicus, thank you so much for appearing on Security Weekly.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Stay tuned. More Black Hat interviews coming up next.